Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. I've got a cool episode which I'm going to tell you about in a second, but a quick story first. When my father owned Tremont Paint, and those of you who follow along know that I was the fourth generation Tremont Paint, which was always in the Bronx, New York, was my great grandparents' business, started in 1907. But my father owned the store, and right in the late 60s, early 70s, the Bronx was getting to be a pretty rough place. And where they were in sort of the South Central Bronx on Claremont Parkway at the time, if you know the area at all, where they were had gotten particularly rough. And it had gotten to the point where they actually wouldn't let you in the store unless they knew you. And so if you came to the store, they didn't care if you had, a handful of cash in one hand and a handful of Benjamin Moore color cards in the other. If they didn't know you, they wouldn't let you into the store because crime had just gotten so bad at the time in the Bronx. And anybody who wants to know the history, you can just go watch the movie Fort Apache, The Bronx, or any of the other in that genre. There were a few at the time, and the Bronx was a really rough place. And so my father wanted out of there. The business had changed dramatically. They were still doing a lot of commercial paint supply, apartment buildings in New York City and all around the Bronx, the museums and the hospitals. But retail business had evaporated because obviously, with the policy of refusing to unlock the front door, you didn't have much of an opportunity for retail business. And, like your businesses now, it's great to sell paint at the time for $10 a gallon, but it's even better to sell it for 13. And so there's a real need for retail business. It's money up front, it's a higher margin, helps your cash flow. It makes for a healthier, more well-rounded business. And my father and I had an uncle at the time in the business. They saw the effects that the situation in the Bronx were having. And so they went about the business of looking for a new location. And right about that time, there was a store in the Riverdale section of the Bronx, which is the one that I knew, over the course of my life. That store there was a store available for sale in the Riverdale section of the Bronx. And my father and my uncle, and actually my grandfather too, and in what was probably his last bit of business at Tremont Paint, they bought that store. And then my grandfather retired, and just my father and my uncle moved on. That store was bought from a woman named Miriam Kadoff. And Miriam Kadoff and her husband, Hy Kadoff, have an interesting story. They were in the paint business forever. Their son ended up with a long career at Benjamin Moore, obviously introduced through his parents' time in the paint business. But they, at the time that they sold the store to my father, they weren't really interested in leaving the business. The husband had some health problems, and he needed to get out, but they weren't looking to retire. They weren't retirement age. And so my father, needing somebody in the store anyway to help him take care of the retail business, take care of the wallpaper and a lot of other things that they didn't have any experience dealing with in a very commercial paint store, kept the people that they bought the store from, the Kadoffs, kept them on. And I remember them well. Miriam Kadoff was a beautiful woman with just enormous amounts of charm, incredible intellect, very sharp in a conversation. She worked for my father for probably around 10 years after he bought the store. Not long after she retired or moved on, I don't recall the circumstances. My mother ended up coming into work for Tremont Paint, and she handled all of that aspect of the business. All the decorating needs and the wallpaper were particularly her specialty, but just handling particularly the female customers that came into the store that were looking for decorative guidance, which is not part of the business that my father had any experience with. And so those are the stores. The store that I'm telling you about that my father bought in, like I said, around 1968 or 70, that's the store that I remember from my youth. That's the store that I grew up in. And so I remember Miriam Kadoff. And of course, I remember my mother working in that store. And so it wasn't unusual to me. It didn't occur to me that women involved in the paint business as independent paint retailers didn't strike me as anything particularly unusual. And it wasn't until I became older, left the business, came back as a full-time employee. That would have been somewhere in the late 1980s, maybe early 1990s. When I came back into the business full time and I started attending, national hardware shows, and locally we had a buying group called Paint Fair. We would attend their shows, as well as All Pro and any of the other groups that I might have been involved with. It wasn't until I was involved full time that I recognized that our industry is dominated by men. And so even though women represent 50% of the population of the United States, and they've climbed into a very large, I'm not sure the statistics, but I'm sure close to equal position in the economy in general, but still our little niche has stayed primarily men. And in the last few years, I've started to see that change. When you go to all pro shows, you see not just more women dealers, and there are many now, but also women employees in key positions. And so that was something that you just didn't see 10 and 15 and 20 years ago. And so I thought that that was cool, that is becoming a thing now. And so I thought it'd be interesting to talk to two female paint dealers and talk about the different experiences that they've had being women in a male dominated field. And so at the All Pro show this past March, at the virtual All Pro show, I was actually able to connect with two independent retailers, two members of All Pro, who are women paint dealers. And so Ebbo, Ash has stores in Austin, Texas, currently home of my daughter Buckwheat, her and her father, and I think there were some other family members involved in that business, Clemens Paint. And in Louisville, Kentucky, we have Pam Sholtes. And Pam has got a very different business from sort of your typical, Benjamin Moore or Pratt and Lambert independent paint retailer. Pam's business is industrial coating supply. And so even though they are a paint store, they have that specialty. And so the two of them agreed, when I told them the topic, the two of them agreed to sit with me for a podcast, which I've just done now. And I'm actually amped up. They did such a great job. And it was so terrific to listen to them and have them share their perspectives on what it's like being a woman, and in Ash's case, being a young woman in a field that's dominated by men. And so I'm thrilled with the way this episode came out. I'm not going to talk that long. I'm going to hand it over to them. But give it a listen, and like and subscribe if you're liking what I'm putting out there, and shoot me an email, shoot me a text, let me know what you think, and let me know what you want to hear about next. Thanks everyone for joining me today. With me today, I have two guests on my episode. The first one is Ash Ebbo. Ash is one of the owners of Clemens Paint in Austin, Texas. Ash, how are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and hook 'em horns, baby.
Hook 'em horns, yep.
And so our second guest with me today is Pam Sholtes. And Pam is the owner of HPP Industrial in Louisville, Kentucky. Pam, thank you for joining me today.
Well, I'm excited. This is the first time I've participated in a podcast, and it sounds like fun.
Yep. Well, I'm looking forward to getting into it with you guys. If you don't mind, we can just get started. I'd love to hear, Pam. I'll ask you to go first. I'd love to hear, starting with just a little bit of the history of how you guys got into the paint business. The origin of this podcast episode was that you guys are somewhat of an anomaly. The industry is dominated, generally speaking, by men. And so I thought we would have a little conversation about what it's like to be a woman in the paint business. And so why don't you start by just telling us how you got here?
Well, I was excited to be invited, and I have to confess, I Googled Ash, and I think it's going to be interesting because we're two different generations of women in a male-dominated field, and I'm anxious to hear how our experiences are the same or different. So I got into industrial coatings because straight out of college, I worked for my dad for 17 years, and we had a small fiberglass fabrication company, which got me in the corrosion resistant field. I left that company in 2000 and became an independent rep for corrosion resistant coatings, just kind of a stepping stone from what I did before. And then fast forward to 2019, and the opportunity presented itself for me to purchase a company I was an independent rep for, because that owner was in the process of planning and retiring. And the timing just was perfect. And that's how I ended up here. But I did have a 20+ year relationship with the business as an independent rep working through them. I was already integrated in a little bit as an outsider. I just had to kind of like have a permanent office in the building.
And so now you're new to being an independent dealer then. You've only
I'm
been a
new
dealer
to
for
being
a year or two.
correct, because all the work I did before was as a manufacturer's rep, not as a stocking distributor. And then my previous experience would have been in a job shop fabrication environment, which is similar, but not at all the same.
And so while you and I are chatting, and we'll get to you, Ash, in a second, why don't you tell us a little bit about HPP as a business? Because I know you guys are a little different than your typical independent paint retailer.
We are. I commonly refer to myself in almost every business I've been involved in as a square peg in a round hole. So we are a stocking distributor, more like a warehouse. So we don't really have like a storefront. We're more of an industrial warehouse. And we do have a will call counter, and we do have some merchandise on display, like I'm sure Ash does in all of her stores, but it's on a much smaller scale. We cater mostly to contractors, installers, and it's in a heavy industrial environment. So the customers I call on aren't really always the painting contractor. I deal with the power companies, the chemical plants, water and wastewater. And so when we market, we would be exhibiting in industrial shows, and we do engineering presentations. So we're a little bit different, but the support, I'm sure, is all the same that other businesses like us offer. Delivery, inventory, technical support.
Right.
Does that kind of answer that?
Yeah, fabulous. And so Ash, I know a little bit of your history, but I'm hoping a few more people listen to this episode than just the three of us. So why don't you fill in everybody else and tell us? I know a little bit about your father, I guess, started the business, and then take it from there.
Yeah, my dad opened. He opened as a Martin Seymour store in 1986. Dan Calkins, the CEO of Benjamin Moore, was his first sales rep. He came to call on my dad and get him to switch over to Benjamin Moore. I think he switched over, I want to say, in 1989, and we've been going strong ever since. He had one location up until 2008. He acquired a second, and then from 2012 until now, we've opened 3 more, and we have a 4th on the line. It should be open hopefully July 1st. I got in to the business. I moved back to Austin in 2012, and that's when I got a little more involved. My brother-in-law has been working with us for a year or 2 longer than that, I believe. And 2 of us and my dad, I mean, between the 3 of us, we're just working on growing the business as much as we can. But we sell primarily Benjamin Moore paint. We also do obviously sundries and, some other lines for wood coatings or industrial coatings, things like that.
And so are you guys more like a traditional paint store? So like you're sort of your typical all pro dealer, you're selling primarily to painting contractors, schools, hospitals, yes, and DIY?
Yes.
And what other lines do you deal with other than Benjamin Moore, if any?
We sell some PPG, that's the Prolux line. We sell Sanson. We sell, some Rust-Oleum as far as, and then, some more niche items like one-shot sign paints, stuff like that. And that's our coatings offerings, and then sundries, we sell the gamut on that.
And is your father still active in the business? What role do you play in the business?
So my dad's very much still active. We are slowly taking things off of his plate as we go, but he still does a lot around the office and everything. For me personally, I do some of the light bookkeeping. I do payables, a little bit of the HR. I handle all the health insurance and stuff for the employees, as well as, I fill in at a store if somebody's out, or, I run, transfers around, or just really whatever needs to get done.
You're a paint retailer, and in my experience, that means one day you're negotiating deals for truckloads, and the next day you're cleaning the toilets.
Exactly.
At least that's what it was like for me in the Bronx.
Well said. Yes.
Ash, we can start with you. Do you feel like you're having any unique experiences, being a woman in a position that traditionally had been a man's role?
It can be challenging. Sometimes I feel like, it takes a little bit more to earn people's respect, prove my knowledge. I think that people have sort of an expectation coming in. It used to be, I'd walk around All Pro and they'd be like, oh, you're just one of the wives or something like that. And, now everybody knows me, so it doesn't happen anymore. But to some extent, everybody has to prove themselves before they can be taken seriously. But I think sometimes it's a little bit, the expectations are a little bit higher. For women in the company.
You have an additional disadvantage, if you don't mind me sharing, is you're very young in an industry that is also tended to be dominated by people like me who are very old. And
I've been doing this for 30 years. Listen to what I say.
Right, exactly. And so, Pam, how about you? Any unique experiences or challenges that you feel like you'd like to share?
Well, so I'm 56. I could be Ash's mom. When I first started, I was the only female in an industrial fabrication environment in my region. And I can remember being referred to as the fiberglass girl, that fiberglass girl.
Right.
And you kind of have to own it, right? Because then I would introduce myself as the fiberglass girl. And
right.
When I first started working, I called on men. I've always been in sales, regardless if it was project management or now, looking for consumers of goods, just a little different, but I've always been in sales. When I first started calling, I called on men my dad's age, and they wore ties and sat behind a desk. And now I call on people my daughter's age, and sometimes they're in uniforms in a power plant. So our industry has done a complete about face to where decision makers no longer wear a tie. They're actually out in the field evaluating and executing. I have to share something with you. So 30 plus years, I've been out peddling corrosive resistant services, products. I was 52 years old the very first time I made an engineering presentation to a group of women. And I'm sitting in this room and it just dawns on me. I look up, there's all women. They're all young women. And I told them that, this is kind of exciting to me. It's the first time that I've ever had a group of female engineers that I'm presenting to, and I've been doing this for 30 years. That's monumental. And there was very little feedback. And I said, go home and tell your mothers I said that. You'll get a little different perspective. And I guess my goal through the years has been, initially, Ash, do you experience this? You have to kind of blend in, and then you have to wait for somebody to have a problem that you can resolve. And then you become part of the team.
Yeah,
that's my personal experience.
Yeah, it goes along with what I was saying earlier. As far, you have to essentially prove yourself to earn the respect. So you need to find a way to show that you're knowledgeable and that you can handle yourself in the environment. So yeah, to that regard, wait until there's an issue and then prove that you can handle it and solve the problem.
But you can't passively sit there. But
no.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, the way I proved myself when I came into the business, my father's belief was, unload the trucks and you've proven yourself to me that you can stay. That was basically his attitude. So has your father done that to you? Did you start out just breaking your back unloading the trucks?
I still do that.
Listen, the paint's got to get in the door, right?
Exactly. Someone's got to do it.
Yeah, terrific. And so one of the things, and this may apply more to you, Pam, one of the things that's interesting to me is there are opportunities for women businesses. And it sounds to me like you guys probably do a lot of bid work and maybe some large commercial work where being a woman-owned business is an advantage. Do you use any of that to your advantage, or is it an advantage in this space?
I'm figuring that out right now. So prior to purchasing HPP Industrial, I have another company that is still in operation. And 20 years ago, I had a contractor ask me to become certified. He needed me to be woman business certified for a project he was working on. So I went through all the hoopla to get certified. It's not hard, it's just a lot of paperwork. And I maintained that certification for 20 years. And to be honest, I only had one customer who used it. Now with the purchase of HPP, and there is a lot more of annual purchasing that goes on, 12-month bid opportunities. So in the first year with HPP, I did the certification process, and I think I'm learning. So I feel like I'm getting my feet wet right now. We just this week received a university, they don't call it a purchase order, they call it a contract of purchase. So now I'm in their database, and that initiated from a WBE inquiry. So that's like a big exciting thing, although
That is exciting.
it's not much yet, but it's a stepping stone. So I personally am right now trying to figure out what that means. I belong to a lot of women business groups, and I hear that there are great opportunities out there, but we have not quite figured out where we fit in that market. And it's not how we've marketed ourselves to date. But in the year of 2021, we've had 2 opportunities that specifically opened a door because we were a woman-owned business.
I'm curious, the women's networking group, are there other people in the coatings world in that group, or is that just all outside, just sort of general business networking?
I find that if I would go to a luncheon and there would be 10 women there, out of the 10, there would be 2, maybe 3 who would be industrial, and none of them are coatings. So there could be a general contractor, there could be an industrial property manager, and then me selling coatings. Now, it just so happens in my region, in my life as a manufacturer's rep and to date, there has historically been 3 women's industrial coatings reps in my region. And I find that just ironic, because you could go anywhere else in the country and there are 0. And then there were like 3 right here within a 4-hour drive of me. But they were all pretty good. And it was a good conversation topic, because they'd say, "Do you know Kelly?" "Oh yeah, I know Kelly. She sells blank." And we kind of knew each other, but we're very much competitors in our market. I don't know that that would be common of the industry though. So I'm usually one of 2 or 3 in a room.
And so, Ash, how about you? Are you involved in ownership? Is woman ownership an opportunity for you guys?
I'm not currently involved in ownership, but we're in the process of trying to work that out with gifting shares and such. But technically speaking, my mom is 51% and my dad is 49%. So we are women owned, and we are also in the process of trying to get that certification. We have had some larger contractors, the commercial contractors, approach us and ask about getting the certification, because they do get jobs that they would be more likely to get if they had dealers that they were dealing with that were women-owned companies. It comes up, I mean, it's not super often, a couple times a year, but I mean, we'd certainly get on more bids if that was the case. And so it's one of our main goals for this year, is to get that done.
You know, I mentioned during the prep for this, I was just in Austin this past week. It's hard not to notice the amount of construction going on in Austin right now, even with my daughter Buckwheat constantly yelling instructions to me from the back of the car where we have to stop and shop and eat. And, even with all that, it's hard not to notice what's going on there. So I would think that this is a budding opportunity for you guys, right?
I mean, absolutely. And, I mean, the running joke is that you can't paint the Austin skyline without putting in a couple cranes. There's always something being built.
Yeah.
Especially downtown.
Well, we stayed close by UT, and I counted 9 cranes just within, a few blocks of where Guy and I were staying. It's amazing what's going on there.
Yeah. I mean, it's constant. And, we're dipping our toes in. We're trying to get more of that commercial market. So, I mean, becoming a certified woman-owned business is a huge step in the right direction for that.
And let's change gears, if you don't mind. When you guys are doing hiring, is gender something that you think of? Are you looking to add more women to your staff? Is that important to you because of the experiences you've had, or because you want to maybe surround yourself more with women? And I'm actually thinking as I'm coming up with this question, I'm looking at you, Ash, because your stores are really different than Pam's. I mean, you're engaging with a lot of female retail customers. Is that something that you think about as you're doing hiring?
I think about it all the time. I would love to have more women on staff. Our biggest problem is that we can't even get people to show up for interviews. So I can't really be selective, to be perfectly honest with you.
I've heard that actually from a number of dealers over the last couple of weeks, that staffing is an enormous problem. Pam, same question to you, with a little caveat. I have no idea how big your business is in terms of employees.
So we're a pretty efficient group. We run our business with 8 employees, 3 of which are female. And I'm probably, I'm the mother of 2 daughters, and I'm the oldest of 3 girls. So all things equal, I would probably lean towards women just because I think we bring a different perspective. But, I'm a little prejudiced.
Right. Well, fair enough. What would you say, Pam, to a woman? You've recently had this experience of becoming an independent paint dealer. It sounds to me within the last 24 months or so. What would you say to a woman who's thinking about a career change into doing something like you and Ash are doing now?
I have to confess, by purchasing HPP, it wasn't really like a complete career change for me because I was already in the industry. It just kind of moved me around on the totem pole on what I was responsible for and to. So it is a little bit different because maintaining inventory is not something that was ever a concern to me in my past careers because it wasn't my responsibility and I didn't have to do it. So that's a struggle, especially in today's market, because we're dealing with some shortages and delivery issues, and inventory now becomes a monumental issue in running a business like this. So I don't know. I've always been one who was never afraid, and I feel like 3 times in my life I totally started careers over, one at 35 and one at 55. So I'm not afraid of that, and I don't think anybody else should be. It's kind of business is business. I don't think it really matters what you're doing. I think it's all the same. It's just a different product or a different method of promoting it. But I think business is all the same. I wouldn't hesitate to try something new if the opportunity presented itself.
Ash, what about you? Are you as enthusiastic? Would you give that same advice to a woman thinking about getting into the business, that it's just like any other business, come on in?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I think having the knowledge of how to run a company, how to run a business is more important. I mean, you can learn the paint, you can learn that stuff. You can hire people around you who know it better than you do. I think I would tell anyone not to hesitate to jump in.
I have a question, Ash. Do you temp paint?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I was in training to temp paint, and they asked me not to go behind the counter anymore. So I agree completely. They joke and tell me I'm colorblind. So
perfect. That's the perfect example. Yeah.
So yes, I agree completely. You can always hire somebody to do what your deficits are.
Exactly. Yes.
So Ash, you had a challenge that think I felt like I dealt with early in my career. I also worked for my father, as I mentioned to you a little while ago. When I first came into the business, I would often stand there in the store and people would refuse to deal with me, just waiting their turn to talk to my father. And it took years to overcome that. Did you have that same experience?
You know, by the time I got in, my dad was already spending more time in the back than up front helping customers. My experience, actually, a lot of our contractors are also family-owned businesses, and the ones who knew who I was, which is certainly not all of them, kind of, I think that they wanted, they want their kids to take over their business. I think they had a little more faith in me. I would say a bigger problem is, newer employees thinking it's nepotism and not hard work, which,
Right.
I mean, give them a couple weeks or, however long, and they'll see how hard I work, and that's okay. We'll get over that barrier. But as far as contractors and customers go, most of the time they were actually pleased to find out that it was still a family business.
And so what you're saying is it was really just me. They just didn't want to. They just didn't want to deal with me. I'm okay with that.
I didn't say it.
So let's wrap this up. I've really enjoyed this, and it's been great to listen to your experiences. Ash, is there anything you want to say just as we wrap this up on the topic that at hand, or anything that's come across as a paint deal, or anything that's on your mind? Let us have it.
I mean, honestly, I don't really have anything else to add. But I appreciate you bringing me on. I think this is a great topic to discuss. I think it's a very relevant topic and one that people don't approach very often. So I appreciate you doing this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Pam, last words, all you.
Oh, I'm just glad to be invited. And it was nice to meet Ash, and I'm excited for a second generation. I worked for my dad a long time, and we could probably have coffee and share stories.
Yeah,
I used to tease
definitely.
with my dad. He was my most expensive part-time employee. But that's the goal, right?
Yeah,
Get him out the door.
I paid
So
my father I paid my father for a decade into his retirement, and my mother and I would talk about it, and I would just say it's just to keep him out of the store.
Yeah.
It's not really salary, it's more a bribe. Just stay away,
Yeah. Well, we'll
listen,
be watching you, Ash. We want to see great things.
Thank you. It was very nice to meet you too.
And so Ash Ebbo of Clemens Paint in Austin, Texas, home of my loving daughter Buckwheat, and Pam Sholtes, HPP Industrial in Louisville, Kentucky. Thank you both so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time and your outlook on the industry.
It was great to be included. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you.